Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to the first episode of Mashable Pakistan Lab, a podcast for superfans. In our first episode, we have with us an academic person, an animator, a film director and a musician, Arafat Mazhar. Welcome to that.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that.
How are you doing?
I'm doing okay. I'm doing very well, all things considered.
All these things that I just said about you, and someone who has a computer background, computer sciences background, how did this happen? Why are you not running a software house?
I mean, I was. So when I was 19, I started a software consultancy. But somewhere down the line, a few incidents started to happen that created a personal quest for me as well, that I wanted to reconcile these identities in me, figure out me as a Pakistani Muslim man. How do I reconcile? Also considering my background, my family is from Jamaat Islami. So all of my family, I grew up being trained to be a leader for Jamaat. So the first thing that happened was that I fell in love. So I fell in love, all of a sudden I wanted to tell stories. And computer science is not essentially, not to say it can't tell a story, not the best discipline to tell a story. Number two, I think there were a lot of things that were at a personal level as well as at a conscious level just affecting me at what was going on, a lot of violence around us. And I had this need to get to the bottom of it, both intellectually and emotionally, figure out, resolve personal anxieties, also the anxieties that I could see around us, around me, and intellectually figure out why some of the progressive voices have not been able to hit people, connect with people at a mass scale. So that resulted in me moving towards an ethnographic research, which was the academic work, looking into certain violence issues in Punjab, and that resulted in a published paper, that resulted in a think tank that I started. I had some capital because my consultancy was doing well. Then I finished my software consultancy, focused completely on the research institution. Once we had our first project, which was with Princeton, when we were publishing our report, I figured this is not enough. Who's going to read a 400-page report? While it is an important resource for certain people, we also need to make it more accessible, and that's where design came in. And how do you reduce something without losing nuance as much as possible? So that's when the first time I took an interest in creating and enacting animation. We did an enactment of a legislation process in 1986. So we did a whole animation on that. So that's how that came in. And then film eventually, because a lot of startups, Shehr-e-Pakistan came in, which used design for civic education. But filmmaking, it's still so strange. I think I'm a filmmaker. The other day we were at a festival and I was surrounded by filmmakers and they were calling me a filmmaker. I was like, I still haven't completely embraced that idea yet. But it came from the same place. All of these things are doing the same thing. If I write a research paper, if I write a report, if I make a animation, or which is an explainer, or if I write a film, all of them as an organization, as an individual, come from the same idea of equality, egalitarian values. And music was my first love anyway. And what it does, however, is that all of my projects still do require music. So everything, so our organization has, and my knowledge set has everything from Islamic jurisprudence and anthropology, literature, philosophy, political science, to design, illustration, animation, and music and sound design. So that one space holds all of these things together to tell one story. Whether it's fictional, non-fictional is sometimes irrelevant, but these days it's more fictional.
So I got to know about your animation work through Shehr-e-Tabasuum, which recently I also discovered is going to be a part of a series. Short films that you are calling Cyber Khilafat.
Yeah.
So just explain a bit about the concept, when is the second movie coming out, and also if you can tell if you have is there like a limit to how many films are going to be there, or it's going to be an ongoing thing?
So conceptually, I feel a lot of it is informed by 10 to 12 years of research and activism personally. And then institutionally, we've got 22 people who bring so many different ideologies, politically speaking, as well as skill sets of how to tell stories. I felt everything was really intersectional. And there was something that was bugging me that when the idea of Shehr-e-Tabasuum, I pitched it and we started working on it, and we started calling it cyberpunk, right? Which is fair enough. But I felt like there's something more to it. There's an additional element that we are saying that cyberpunk doesn't cover. Cyberpunk covers the anxieties of technology and contemporary urban anxieties of Japan and US and maybe the Western world. But we're consistently asking ourselves, how do we tell our story for ourselves, not for the North? It's a South story. How do we do that? And one of the things was very common, that was very clear. We were looking at how radicalized versions of misuse of religion, of Islam and technology and fascist elements in states, what does that intersection do? And increasing, so over 3 years ago is when I started thinking along those lines. So I had a lot of stories in my head. Tabasuum became the first one. And we started, however, seeing an exponential increase of that being a reality. So one thing was clear, that we were onto something, that the line between fiction and reality was being blurred. Twitter was being used constantly for increased radicalization and for surveillance, but then intersected with some radical religious elements as well. So you would have hashtag mandatory killing, all of those things. So that's what I call cyber khilafat, and I wanted it to be not just something that we own, that we put it out there, because I feel like there are storytellers across the country who want to say the same thing. So I do want it to be owned by people, and that be a genre. So we self-coined it, but hopefully it becomes its own thing. We do want an anthology. We do want to tell. We have at least 3 scripts in mind. There's a Shehr-e-Tabasuum feature length. There are 2 more, and then there's Swipe, the one that's second film that you talked about. That's releasing on 31st. And that one is a bit more direct in its messaging and its story and its narrative and arc, as opposed to Tabasuum, which people could interpret on various levels. So I think it's a very courageous, bold voice. I think we're projecting overall our voice much more clearly. So that's the plan so far, and I don't think there's a limit. It's just that production-wise, where do we get our grants, the kind of deals that we're able to get with distributors, eventually where do we want to strike a deal with, because that's a very tricky thing. We want no compromises and no censorship. So these are some tricky things, but for now it's been going well. I'm very happy. I'm very happy with the exceptional team that we have. The research team, the writing team, the animation team, the music team, which is just me, so I might as well just say it. But yeah.
So Shehr-e-Tabasuum, for those I'm pretty sure everybody saw it because it became a thing when it was released. Are you personally a George Orwell fan, or was it an interpretation that viewers took, or was it intentional?
So here's the thing. So we had these long screenings. First in London, I had a series of lectures on Pakistan and violence at 8 universities where we were screening this. And then in Pakistan, we had like these long tours of around 30 universities. And Orwell would always come in. And I actually lied. And I said, yeah, Orwell is an influence. Because it's so clear that Orwell is an influence, because I've never read 84. But it is right there in the zeitgeist. Yeah. You don't have to read it to be influenced by it. So clearly I was at some level influenced by this idea, not just by that, by Necromancer, by Blade Runner, by a lot of films that were then derived from there. And then also because it's a very collaborative process, even in the writing part. So the concept is a single sentence premise, but then when you expand on it, everybody's going to bring their influences, and they have read Orwell. But the idea is so close to what we are experiencing. Sometimes I think even if we hadn't been influenced by Orwell, we would have arrived at a somewhere similar, because it's not fantastical what we're talking about. We live it every day. It's not like we're predicting, really, even though it's a dystopian future. Some of the things we're not predicting this could happen. Some of the things you and I are experiencing and living. Yeah. But yeah, so in one way the influence is there, whether you can't escape it. And I embrace it, it's perfectly fine, but it comes first and foremost, as I said before, from my personal experience with activism and research, and the relationships on and off, good and bad, with some elements, whether they're state, non-state. So yeah.
So the second film, Swipe, you had like September was a month-long sort of a pre-teaser campaign where you
Yeah.
guys were releasing, small bits on and off. So just talk about what else you can share.
Yeah.
Like, it's a short film, so don't give the entire film, but
Yeah.
what else can you share? What can people expect who have seen the previous one? What
Yeah.
expectations they can have from it?
So in some ways, it's going to surprise. So we do have a small niche of very loyal followers, and we're very grateful about that. And I think some people were and might be expecting something visually that looks similar.
Yeah.
I might be so cyberpunk does not have to be neon lights. So Mr. Robot is cyberpunk, but it's contemporary. It's not neon lights. It's not flying cars. It's about high-tech low life. It's about critique on class. So it's the same genre, cyber khilafat in our case, but I still think it falls under that category as well, cyberpunk as well. But I think it's going to surprise in terms of visually. It is very rooted in Multan, contemporary Multan. It's grittier. It's a bit more real. It feels a bit more okay. We're talking about this now. We're doing this. We're not going to talk about 2071. We're talking about 2020. And there's just one fictional element in it, which is that there is an app. It's called iFatwa, and it democratizes the fatwa of who is wajib al-qatl and who is not. And the idea is that children are addicted to it. And it's a game. It's a game where there's an ajr board and you want to get higher and higher. So that's the driving force for what happens. So it's a film about loss of innocence. It's a critique on how callous we've become with something so sacred, something so beautiful. But at the end of the day, both Tabasuum, what one can expect, it's a visual treat. That I can say with a lot of confidence. Narratively, how does it go? We can only, story-wise, we can only find out once it's done. But what you can expect is something very authentic, something honest. There's a commonality with Tabasuum, apart from the fact that it's still cyber khilafat. It's also about language, so and expression. So Tabasuum was about expression as well. This is also about expression. The fact that, and something that I feel very strongly about, that you take something very beautiful, a language, a term, a word. So in Tabasuum it was smile, but around us, and that's what, in your initial question as well, my transition from computer science away, one of the anxieties was, how can love be violent? How can ishq be violent? How can ghairat be violent? How can namus be violent? These are such virtuous words. So this idea of certain segments of society deciding what language means. So something like who is patriotic, you define it to mean only one thing, then it stops being a beautiful term. It becomes an instrument of control. On the other hand, you take something like, I don't know, Ghazi or whatever, and that's one. But on the other hand, you take traitor or shatim or someone who said something offensive, and you expand it. Now everyone's, whatever you do. So there's a bit of black comedy in there as well. It's an absurdist film somewhat. So that's partly what you can expect, that it still has that running theme that we are talking about expression, not necessarily freedom of it, but the way beautiful ideas such as love and smile and honor have been corrupted by certain segments of society, and what happens, what are the consequences of those things, and what could it mean to resist in such a world. So yeah, that's, I think, without giving away the arc, or what we have been thinking about.
So yeah, so I would want to ask, given the sort of subjects you're going to cover in this specific film, and as you said previously, this is exactly what we have been experiencing, like our social media timelines, our news is filled with such stories. What has been a reaction? You have shared that you have a small fan following, but when because given your background and everything that I know about the work that you have done, you're trying to use this medium to start a debate, or maybe have a bit more open conversation. So can you share some incident, or has it happened? Have you witnessed anything where a decent debate has initiated, even maybe at a small level. It doesn't have to be like at a huge level.
Before the film, on multiple levels with lectures, I saw that happen very clearly. But with the film, there were certain incidents when you are doing the screening and you're in person. The thing with online is when there's a screen, there's something changes. You lose a bit of humanity there.
Yeah.
But when we had people in Karachi University filled, like 200 people sweating, and then all of a sudden them interpreting the film from everything ranging from body politics, feminism, mental health, forced happiness, bullying, how younger children in FSC and A-level students feeling like they were being controlled. Ranging from that to someone someone from Balochistan in Karachi University talking about missing persons, because one of the scenes was a child gets. So it is a very textured and very dense film. So there's a lot to interpret. So there was I think a lot of people felt cathartic and they talked about it. But the one that meant the most for me was this wasn't in Pakistan. I was in Oxford and I gave a lecture, and after that I played a film. And one of these kids, he took me to the side and he said that I am from one of the minority communities that everybody just wants to kill, so we had to migrate here. And then he started crying. Even though the film is very metaphorical, it's not clear, it's an allegory, but obviously he got it. And it's like, it's the first time I felt like someone from Pakistan told my story. And then I started crying as well because of that. So in that way, I don't know if it's a debate or not, but it was definitely that space that you need. Come on, give us some space. Like that Ahmed Faraz nazm that we also use, in which is really saying, जब तुम लफ्ज़ मार दोगे, तो शहर में बचेगा क्या? So I think it's just us trying to say, hey, listen, we also have something to say, and we're going to say it. And you're not going to stop us from saying it. And that feeling was, I think, cathartic. So
this is not your first animation project. You have been dabbling in it before as well. So can you share a bit about your other projects as well? And when you do that, just also talk about how you started animation. Was it like, because it's an art form in itself and it requires a specific skill. So is it self-taught, or how did you get into that?
So the first time we did an animation was because we had done short videos, like videos that are slide videos with motion graphics, and that's easier to do. But the first time we did 2D animation was trying to enact, we studied a whole bunch of proceedings of legislation in the parliament in 1986 during Zia's time, and we wanted to enact it for people, that this is what happened. And I felt the best way to do that was give them faces. So we had Liaqat Blod, who's an uncle of mine, be on the floor talking, and that was our first attempt at that. And then we moved on to Shehri-Pakistan as well, where we've done multiple, more than 50-60 2D animations on rights. How do you file an FIR? What is a Nikah-nama? What are your rights to fair trial? So all of that is civic rights. And then Hashiya, which is historical, critical history, what does colonialism mean? And the important thing was everything is supposed to be in Urdu. So all of these things, for me, the surprising bit was we've had 30 years and we've been fighting some of these forces. Why haven't human rights community tried to provide resources in local indigenous, local languages and vernacular languages? So we did it in Urdu and sometimes in Saraiki and Sindhi, whenever we would have the resources. Now, as far as the learning part goes, so I myself am a very average animator itself as an artist. The thing is, every person, I need to know a bit of everything that happens in the teams. A, so that I earn the respect of the person. I don't want to be a sage person who goes like, do this and do that. And they need to respect that I understand what they're doing. And B, I love the form. I love those things, and they help me understand, be a fuller person, complete person. But C, most importantly, it helps me tell a story. Now, all of these are self-taught because I'm a computer science student. So illustration is something that I started off with a little bit. I learned that a little bit, but from people who know it better than me, because I hired these designers and animators. The first Shehri-Pakistan animation is something that I did with Zara, was one of her, and figured out really the software a bit with her. As far as the actual animation goes, I'm not the animator. I would animate a couple of characters. For example, in Tabasuum, there are a few characters in the Shadi scenes that I've animated. My focus is first and foremost to have a shared vision, to figure out what are we going to leave, what are we going to show, what are we going to tell. It's not. So I'm a decent enough animator, but whatever I do know in illustration, animation, music, except computer science, has been self-taught and has been taught by my incredible team. And that has been a very rewarding process as well, because that means that I'd be less derivative because I'm not trained by this one coursework. So yeah, but it's still a process in learning. Individually speaking, there's a long way for me to go.
So just talk about some of the other projects you have done through animation with specific names, what the reaction was, and if people want to, access them, where can they do that?
So I mean, starting from I work with I'm on the board for Never Forget Pakistan, which was for a bit very active, and we did an explanation on how some laws were passed in late 80s. So they can find that on Never Forget Pakistan's YouTube channel. It's the untold story of Pakistan's blasphemy laws, and they can find that animation there. That was our first animation. The response was great because we weren't trying to escalate things. We were just trying to reflect what was on paper, what happened in '86. That history is a lived, breathing experience that we're facing consequences of. Here's what happened. Then we did I did a startup, Shehr-e-Pakistan, and that's been a series like 50+ animations and like many videos. That's facebook.com/ShehriPakistan, the same on other social media platforms as well. That's a civic rights, an attempt to give meaning to Shehri that is more than just you live here. So the difference between citizenship is, because there's been so many civic right efforts, you had your civil rights movements in the 60s, it keeps on growing as a word. It means more than you live here. It means it's a way of thinking, approach with spaces, with people, with state, with resistance, all of those things. So we wanted to do that with Shehri as well, that this is not just being a bashanda, it has some values in them. So we started with vocabularies, what is an ayn, right to fair trial, what are your rights in a nikahnaama, all those things that I feel like we should have done decades ago, but somehow we don't. And whenever we did it in English, and that was already available. So we try to do that in local languages. And then there's Hashiya, which is a more recent one, which is the same thing, but instead of civic education, it's at critical and alternative histories. Because I'm tired, as everyone is, of going through metric, studying history that sometimes feels like, is that what happened? So we have a chance also to look at colonialism, have a chance, and do it all in Urdu. So our first series is in collaboration with University of Bristol, which is Istamariyat, Mabada Istamariyat, and basically colonialism and post-colonialism, and intergenerational trauma. So that's our series, looking at how the British, and that's all TED style animated, telling stories. Some of them are short films, Jallianwala Bagh short films. So these are all going to be available on Hashiya. And then obviously our fictional work is on Shehr-e-Tabasuum and Swipe. That all comes under Puffball. So Puffball is the studio that we do some services as well. Like we're the agency for one of the biggest companies in the world, animation agency. But our most important work is the fictional film work over there. So those are some of the animated portfolios, stories that we've been able to tell through design and illustration, but in specific, as you said.
Your third work title, which is a musician, is not something that often comes up in public. When people say you're a musician, people might think, you give background scores to some of your video work. But you shared a link with me and I was going through them. So first of all, there are categories of musicians, like, there are different genres. How do you define yourself as a musician? Because I heard some rap, then I heard some slow beat music, and then I heard some pretty interesting instrumental stuff. So how do you define yourself?
I mean, I try not to define myself, especially as a musician, because that's one part where I also want to be just completely free. And that's partly maybe also why, because I've been trying to do a lot of things, it has come in the way of me fully pursuing music as a profession. But I'm lucky enough that the work that I do requires music. But as far as my musicianship, quote unquote, is concerned, I think we are all so many contradictory selves. So at any given point, if I'm feeling myself, I'm going to do something really groovy. I'm going to play my guitar. I'm going to make something fun. My heart is in scores. My heart is lies in instrumentals and using and in melodic phrases and saying things through. Because I play the piano and the guitar, that being the main voice, but then using and embellishing them with local instruments and just really telling a story that can say something on its own, and using textures, using soundscapes. So I think broadly speaking, there are two, I feel like, bigger sides to one that's more attitude, rock and roll, groove, fun, and aggressive and grit, and the other which is a bit more, for lack of better word, just tender and sensitive, and just trying to, even if it's raw and energetic, just like a bit more connected to a deeper self, a bit more reflective. And that's where I think I feel my most authentic self, because I get to play with melodies a lot. Because the first thing that I ever felt coming from a Jamiyat background onwards, that felt like, okay, that feels okay. Why have I been thinking, till 18 I thought it was haram. So was, without any training, melodic phrases were in my head, and I was composing in my head. So clearly it was a language, just like English, just like Urdu. So that kind of instrumentation allows me to say something that I think language doesn't allow me to say. So and that's the fun bit about and the privilege of, as well, of having multiple disciplines, that if something, design cannot express exactly what you want to say, whether personally or professionally or at a broader scale, if poetry cannot do that, if prose cannot do that, if words cannot do that, maybe music can do that. So all of these things, at the end of the day, for me, I try to integrate as much as possible. But I also try to have fun with it. So I think there is a version of me that's beyond, dark, sensitive music. There's a version of me that's not really public, which is like got like a lot of songs, including the final song for Shehr-e-Tabasuum that I did with Shorbanoor, who's an excellent musician, was just a lot of fun. Even though it was a song that encapsulates rage and anger, but it was a lot of fun to do, and I think I would love to explore that bit a bit more. I would really want to do something that's live rock and roll, but very dance, very funk, but using local instruments. So there are things I want to explore, but I don't know if I'll have the time to soon enough. But
yeah, so I'm assuming in the future we can expect a full range album, just a music.
Absolutely.
Experimentation.
Absolutely.
You already mentioned it that given your family background, and you were being trained to be a sort of for a leadership role in Jamiyat and everything. And you have mentioned that you discovered music. Can you share a bit of how that happened? Because I'm going to assume that you also self-taught or learned on your own the guitar and piano. How did that happen? And given your specific personal story, was there a conflict? I'm assuming there was a conflict with your family, and how does that?
I mean, so first thing would be first. I think so. My parents migrated from East Pakistan, so we lived a very existence that was and we at that time were very modest financially speaking as well, but we were limited to Iqbal Town. I was limited. My the first time I saw a woman outside of my family was a bit of a revelation for me. Okay, oh, she's not wearing a burqa? Like, what's this? So there was a lot of milestones till you reach a place where you're like, you know what, I'm going to make some music. Two things that I think were very important to that. One was there were two channels allowed at my house, BBC and CNN, and BBC would play its sound ID and it would be really nice. I was like, everybody's okay with that, but there's a melody there, and there'd be some documentaries and it'd be beautiful. And again, that we think it's something so beautiful and loving and tender, how can that be wrong? But the real thing came in, the need to make music came in by falling in love, which is why love is a recurring theme in all kinds of ways. It's the most powerful thing in all of the work that we do. And because when you experience love, you want to express it. And when you want to express it, that's when, you know, you say goodbye to that past life, because you know that words are not enough. You want to draw, you want to create, you want to dance, and then you want to create music, and that's what felt natural to me. So I think that inspiration to express came from that, and then it took its own form. I was able to learn a lot. First it was just computers because I didn't have instruments, so I learned some of it from Zulfi from EP. He was a senior at my college first year. So for a long time I did that. I played around a lot with tablas and piano on software, and later on it took its own form. I joined a few bands as well, started a few bands, and made my own studio. In fact, partly the reason I started right in my second semester started a business was so that I can create my own studio, buy my own instruments. That which brings me to the conflict, which is its own nice, beautiful little arc. So 18, 19, I don't really have an instrument, so there's no real conflict, but you know, I start making money and my business starts really working out, so now all of a sudden I can buy instruments. I still hid it from my parents, adult 21-year-old man just hiding from it takes long for Pakistani men to grow up. It takes us a long time, but we can get there.
So at least somebody admitted it.
Yeah, no, I'm still growing. But I think eventually when the conflict started coming was that everything that I was taking up was the antithesis of what my parents stood for. And I respect what my parents stood for because I know their story. It's an authentic story, and they're honest people, and they love me. And I think for both of us, it took us years to reconcile how different we are. So at the start, it was like, how dare you? We go on rallies, we work hard to keep this law as it is. My mom gives a dars every weekend that this is haram, this is haram, this is haram. Every second thing that you're doing, so we've done campaigns on child abuse, wrote a song about it, just openly, I'm very open about things, felt like an affront to them, as if this is a reaction. And it really wasn't. It was things that I believed in. Obviously, partly there would be rebellious streaks as well, but the fact that I'm still doing it as an adult man who's grown up, and when they saw that, and I think especially with blasphemy laws, my mom, who's a very important rukun in Jamaat, now feels like that law needs to go. That engagement, okay, what he's doing is different, it scares us, but he knows what he's doing. Eventually the love, I think, never went away. I think the respect fluctuated, and eventually I think, so during the Aurat March, I was on this end at the Aurat March and my mom was on the other end with Jamaat's Hashiya Aurat March, and we came back in the evening and we had a nice conversation about it. So I think it is as wholesome as it can be now, but it started off with a lot of conflict, which is how things are. And I think my parents had to grow, I had to grow. I think it taught me a lot about empathizing with what we otherize very quickly. Oh, those barbaric, extremist, religious people. But when your own parent is like that, then you have to be like, okay, why does my mom love that person when I know she's a wonderful human being? How do I hold both of those things together? So yeah, that I think in a way it helped me grow a lot as well.
So, taking from this, I would like to ask something that I think you said in one of your other interviews. Is about, there are privileges, and with all the things that are happening around the world, this word and that recognizing your privilege is something that's being repeated in different contexts, be it in the race discussion in US or anything else. So you mentioned the term which really clicked with me was privilege of knowledge, because to me it sort of connected with that thing of otherization, of just saying, okay, because you know this, you have had the privilege of some exposure or something, or you have access to books or materials, and you say कि जो अगला बंदा है वो तो किसी काम का नहीं, ये क्यों ऐसे ये जाहिल रहेंगे, XYZ. So just talk a bit about that, and also the fact that storytelling is something that connects with everybody. मतलब in language में it can be a different language, it can be a different medium, visual, audio, anything. But the baseline that storytelling connects with everything. How can the use of storytelling through different mediums help us build this gap and of recognizing privileges as well?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. But I think it hits home at a lot of points. So I remember a lot of when I entered the human rights field, and a lot of people who were encouraging me because they felt I was onto something. I was always afraid somewhat that I was going to be seen as someone apologetic, because I refused to see things not just in binary, but also I didn't want to patronize most of the people. So I know obviously there is a line that you cross and you go like, that's deliberate, that's power, that's violence. But so much, just I can see a dozen parallel universes where I'm not sitting here making these films. If my exposure remained there, I didn't meet someone who showed me how tender the world can be, or how beautiful the world can be, or how why aesthetics are important, or why diversity is important, then that was a privilege for me. That was, and then from there, me being lucky, having financial resources, running a successful business, which was 80% of it was just luck. Then being able to access texts and people that not everyone will get access to, who will then in turn show you not only knowledge but an embodiment of that knowledge. Oh, this person behaves this way and I look up to that. And then beyond that, around the world, and you read history. Now that's a coincidence in my life that I can see not happening in 8 different versions. That allows me to see could be me. So if there are children who are in let's say a school, or Qadri's son is in every majlis, and I feel like we're failing him because he doesn't have the privilege of anything beyond what everybody's around training him to be the next one, to be just like your father. So what do I do? How do I reach him? So there's this need in me that I want to talk to him, but I can't. He's not just physically far away, he's just far away. He has no idea what you and I might be thinking. We are just an other, and that anxiety has been manufactured by the people in power. Therefore, one of the important things is to make that knowledge an embodiment of that knowledge, and the humanity of the people who have that knowledge or embody those knowledge first and foremost the important thing. We're not here to threaten you. Because there's an anxiety, right? Yeah. And I've experienced that anxiety time and time again. Every time I would see, so the first time I saw a woman in jeans, I experienced an anxiety in me because all my family members wear burqa. And it's like the first time I'm seeing, all of a sudden the sun wasn't coming out from this side, it was coming from this side. I was like, what is this? How do I reconcile this? And it took me time. So I can understand that it can feel violent inside. It's just how do you want to respond? So there must be a way, a loving way, a tender way, sometimes aggressive ways, all kinds of ways, but it should be available and accessible, knowledge and different forms and in embodied forms. Not like Twitter fights in which like, you're terrible, what happened to those barbaric people? Then we're just being like white folks coming to South Asia and saying, oh, you barbaric people, let us tell you what freedom of speech is. As far as storytelling is concerned, and I'm still trying to figure it out, but theoretically speaking, that's what it feels like. It feels like we always wanted, our mission statement and everything has been, how do we make it more accessible? And while internet is obviously not everywhere, it's still better than just doing a workshop in Serena with 50 people. So how do we use technology to make things more accessible, use terms that people understand, target people very clearly? And obviously we built relationships with a lot of wonderful seminaries and a lot of wonderful muftis who are very honest. And so how do we engage in a way that's not one directional in person? And then online, how do we make it available and not out of no reason be offensive for no reason, just stay in the spirit of things, because that's a very egoic self. I have anger in me. I've been threatened, I've been harassed, everything's happened. But then if my response is only coming from a place of anger, then that's just a very ego-centered, I want to sleep at night knowing that I'm fighting a good fight. But really, what do I want? What's my deepest intent and need? And I've arrived at the conclusion, I've lived that life where it was a very angry activism thing, and it's fair enough, it's legitimate. You need anger, you need power, you need that emotion, but eventually I've realized human connection. How do I connect to the humanity of that side, quote unquote, or multiple sides, and how can they connect to my humanity? And I think storytelling can do that. For the last segment of our podcast, we asked people on our social media to send in some questions for you. So we got some, and one of the questions is, will you guys try to make animated films on some Pakistani novels, literature in the future? I mean, there's certainly some that we have in mind with folklore. So, I mean, the reason you do live action and not animation as a choice should also make sense. So, for example, if there's a Manto story, it makes more sense to do it live action.
Yeah.
One should do it live action. But there's something fantastical and folklore that I'm really interested in that we want to explore. So definitely we want to tap into our local storytelling and bring it to life that may not be possible to live action. Yeah.
So, and another user is asking how long did you work on the whole thing? So basically, and this is also another similar question, so I'll just combine the two of them. But from the scratch idea, you know, going through all the process of scripting, animation, and, you know, finally saying this is the final product. What was the duration, and is it in chunks, or you guys do it like one project in one go?
So Shehr-e-Tabasuum from start to end was just one go. It's just like people were, sometimes we had more resources, sometimes they had to be given away to Shehri. Ended up taking us more than a year and a half, even though it's a 8 to 10 minute film, but some technical parts of it required a lot of drawings. So we ended up making 800,000 drawings. So that's a lot of drawings. Yeah. It's 8 lakh drawings. And obviously that's a production part. You have post-production, you have pre-production. With the second film, Swipe, which is going to be on YouTube 31st October, it's going to be available to everyone. It's for you guys. It's our story that we're telling for us. It's not for white folks. It's not for the Western community to look at and romanticize for a year and say, oh wow, brown film for a year before it's even available to our own community. It's an absurd idea. It pisses me off. So please, it's freely available, but it's a lot of hard work that went into it. So make sure you check it out on 31st. Follow Swipe Film on Instagram. We'll get more updates there. That Swipe ended up taking a bit more than a year, but that's also partly because of COVID, and partly because of also pre-production ended up starting somewhere in the last quarter of Shehr-e-Tabasuum. So it took more than a year. I would say it also took a year and a half, but that was more in chunks, and then COVID and everything. And right now we are working really hard. The fact that I'm here is a cost for like the team, because everybody's hands-on trying to finish it on time, because there are small things that are always left. Yeah. And there are certain scores that I need to finish up as well. But I have a good feeling about this. I think you guys are gonna like it. I think you guys are, if not like it, at least I think it's gonna stimulate something. It's gonna move something. I hope. Like is a subjective idea, but I think there's something we're saying in there that's very authentic and that has not been said before. Everything else is just a medium. It's dystopian or not, we're using tech or not, all of those things are just a way. But what we really want to say, I think we are saying it without fear, and I think that will show. And I think it will also resonate, not just to offend, I don't think, but resonate. Oh, you mean this, and I understand what you're saying.
So you have been like making short films. So one of the users is asking, do you plan to make a feature animation film someday?
So there are a lot of things. So I'm finishing up a documentary on the blasphemy law that releases end of next month. I'm finishing up as a team. We're finishing up an animated film on 1971 separation, 1953 anti-Ahmadiyya violence. So there are a lot of things that are always happening, and I'm trying that our team is curated in a way and institutionalized in a way that we can do all of those things. One of the dreams is a feature length. So we do have somewhat of an outline for Shehr-e-Tabasuum, and we get asked this question by you guys a lot. When's the feature length coming? Because the world building is very rich. And we want to do it, but most of the times we even started conversations about a deal with any production house. We know that this is not going to look like an independent film. So what we might do is we might in a few weeks announce a crowdsourcing thing to do either a pilot episode of a mini-series or just like maybe first part of a 2-part film. We know what we want to say. There's a story there in that world that we want to talk about. But hopefully there's no commitment, but it's the desire is there, the need is there, the resources are there, the capabilities are there, and the story, most importantly, the story is there. There's a dhancha of a story that exists. So yeah, hopefully, pray for us, hopefully.
Someone is asking that if one wants to study animation, which place is best in Pakistan? And maybe if an international place.
Internationally speaking, Parsons is a great school, and there are a lot of good schools. You can Google that, but not everybody can. They're very expensive art schools, very few scholarships available. So there are these. So obviously, BNU, NCA try to teach animation, but they don't focus a lot on it. So they focus a lot on CGI and 3D animation sometimes, yes. Then there's this foundation university that I found out that we have hired 2 people from them that are trying to focus a lot on animation as well. But really, to be honest, you don't need to go to a university. Number 1, get Richard Williams' book on the animation. That's the first textbook that you need, and you do need a textbook. Number 2, intern at a place. That's the best way. So if you're in Karachi, go to Usman Riyaz's studio and intern there. If you're in Lahore, come to us, intern there. You need to go through the pipeline, and anything that this university might teach you in 4 years, you'll learn in 4 months. And I think draw a lot. So if you want to get into animation, just and learn anatomy a lot, and also just know why you're doing it. Is it just, you know, how people want to learn a guitar just so that they can play one song and find your voice, do something that, okay, this is what I want to say, this is what I do with it. So if you want to, and obviously I understand, Pakistan is not just Lahore and Karachi, which is why a lot of the times we have people coming from out of the city, just coming, we want to work here because they feel passionately about animation. So there are certain sacrifices that is required, unfortunately. But go for it. I mean, if you ever feel like you want to intern at our place, connect with us, connect with Usman, and I think internship, that's on the job, looking at, because we had to figure this out ourselves as well. We weren't trained in this. None of us were really trained, quote unquote, in this, and we made mistakes. We're still making mistakes. We're still learning, and we're improving with time. So just be part of our process as well. We're not intimidating. We're just like you guys. So come in and see the process, and maybe you'll see that it's not that difficult. It's nuanced. It's delicate. It's not that difficult. If you can draw, you can animate as well.
So you mentioned music, you know, people learning guitar just for that one specific song, or, you know, just one specific party. That's, so I think that's a generational thing.
Oh yeah, that's
usse pehle I think Junaid Jamshed's vital signs ke hai. So yeah, the one other question was, any tips for making music? Because I think this is an interesting question for coming, getting an answer from someone who was self-taught and, you know, found music.
So I mean, if you all, there are people who already know how to play an instrument, but they may not know how to compose. So I can't comment on how do you learn an instrument. You just learn an instrument, but you go to a teacher, you go to YouTube. But as far as making music is concerned, I mean, you have to approach it the same way you would approach poetry. There's a vocabulary. You might have a little of it, so there would be some. So it doesn't matter if you're technically very proficient. So if someone has this vocabulary in English or this vocabulary in English, both of them can create excellent prose and poetry. It's how you use that phrasing. So if you start, number 1, looking at music not just as, oh, I have to do this, but that it's a phrase, it's a sentence that you're saying. There's a comma, there's a full stop, there's a space. So just think of it as language, number 1. And as far as approach is concerned, I think try and sing. If you're making a score, for example, if you're taking an instrumental, or try and sing it first. I think that would be more authentic, because your fingers might reach something accidental or something that you've learned on a scale. It might be less you. So it has to come from here. So hum it and be unapologetic about it. You know, so, you know, go like dun 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 dun. Do that first, and then play it on your instrument. And if you're scoring in this, maybe if this question was about scoring, if you're scoring to image, that's a film or documentary, at least I always need a team to tell me, is this working or not? So I have no idea. I would make variations upon variations. So the hard disk is full of instrumentals, right? That on their own might work, but like, how does it work on image? I need feedback. But B, try to play to image. Try to play to image. Try to get just like an actor is. So if an actor has to play a character, they have to get into that space, they have to embody that. So try to understand what's going on in the image, and just try and then say it first before you hit the keyboard. Other than that, I think there's a lot of listening, expanding your horizons of listening to music as well. At the end of the day, if you're bold, if you try and be confident, fearless, don't mind doing things that are, you know, that might be unconventional, then you might be connected to and tapped to your voice, which is the most important thing in composition, that it's your voice. You're not just repeating a Hans Zimmer, and you're also doing, and it's not your voice. Yeah, so I think that's the most I can do in 5 minutes.
Yeah, so last question. The person specifically asked, do you think that Pakistanis will ever swipe left on their outdated mindset? And I would, add or sort of rephrase this question, that because we have already talked about, privilege of knowledge and not focusing on, the otherization of other mindsets or other viewpoints. So you, with all the life experiences that you have, do you see a future, are you optimistic about it, where people can have a conversation with, two opposing or polarized viewpoints and have a decent debate without anybody else feeling threatened?
I mean, first, Fatma, I cannot afford not to be optimistic. It's just something I cannot afford. I can't wake up without believing that what we do will matter, can matter. The process is rewarding, sure, but I'm not in a position where I have that choice. Naturally, I am an earnest, optimistic person. I think I'm a positive person, but even if I weren't, I wouldn't have that choice. And I think we have to hack these things sometimes, and I think all of us need to, because if the final statement is this country is going to hell, this community is going to hell, the swipe left refers to an app. So for people who do not know, in that swipe film, where you swipe right for wajib al-qatl and you swipe left for maafi, so they're essentially asking if we'll have more tolerance and peace in society. And I like to think that we will, because if you look at history, this happens. The only thing is that we might not have victories, but we have to remember, if we do not stand where we stand, then things would be worse. So that's number one. I know that's not very encouraging, but you start there and you hold your ground. You self-reflect, because you're also human. You might be off. You might be very westernized in the way you think about human rights. You might be very almost colonial in the way you think about human rights. So be self-critical as well. But I am optimistic, because it has happened in other communities. It has happened in other countries. Why can't it happen here as well? But the honest answer is, and I heard James Baldwin say it for the first time in somewhat similar phrases, that can you afford to even ask that question if you want to dedicate your life to some kind of sustainable change?
On this note, thank you very much, and hopefully we'll have you back for another film or music or whatever you're doing.
Hopefully,
next.
It was an absolute privilege. Thank you, Fatma.
Thank you.